Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Blood, Dust and Snow, Part 11. Sunday, August 10th, 1941. On the Luga, 1100 hours. We are in the process of driving down to the bank of the Luga. The Nebelwerfer are changing positions and my platoon is still tasked to protect them. I wonder if we'll draw artillery fire down there because it's right in the range of the Russian mortars. At the moment, we are traversing a forest which has been very much hacked to pieces by the Russian artillery. I have already been down at the Luga to get an impression about the situation there. We'll have to dig ourselves in there, no question about it. The weather is wonderful now and the flyers make full use of it. A Messerschmitt returned from chasing a pair of Russian bombers drawing a thick trail of smoke. While it was flying over us, its cockpit canopy flew off and tumbled to the ground. It seems to have flown on without further problem, however. The Nebelwerfers are already moving out, our tanks will follow them when they have gone. If we drove in front, our tracks would make the already bad road unusable for their light vehicles. My driver, Unteroffizier Albert, has caught a cold or something like that, probably due to the wet weather. What exactly is wrong with him, he can't describe. He can feel something in his bones, he says. There is something wrong with his stomach and he feels like he needs to puke. I can't tell if he's just pretending or not. I hope he doesn't come up with a story about his nerves just like Opetz and others did. Then I will really lose my patience. Unteroffizier Eich of the light platoon, who was only just decorated, has now decided that the intestinal ulcer that had already caused him trouble in France has reappeared. I can't stand people like that. At 1600 hours, the launchers were supposed to fire again. If they continue to move at that speed, there is no way they can fire another salvo today. Just now, a group of our bombers flew over. Ju-88 and HE-111, 15 aircraft in total. Our best wishes go with them. Baumann says that they are able to cause a lot of damage. Well, I hope they do. Hiller has informed me that a tank of the 1st Company has been knocked out, direct hit by a Russian bomb. Its parts now lie spread across a field near the 2nd Luga Bridge. 2 men were killed. Now, war is certainly no life insurance. The Red Army is still offering stiff resistance here. Monday, August 11th. Luga, 0900 hours, launcher battery. I am in my tent, which has been half dug into the ground. Weather outside is still abysmal. At 0730, the launcher battery fired its first salvo into the morning mist. When the first rocket streaked into the grey sky, the first drops had begun to fall and, at the time the 100th round was fired, it was already raining quite heavily. I would really like to see the effect of a barrage of that kind from nearby, and it was already so impressive at Raseiniai. Damn! I nearly wet myself again as just now another salvo howled into the sky. There will be several more coming today, I guess. Even though I have now heard this infernal howling and hissing multiple times, I seem to be unable to get used to it. It terrifies me every time. 300 meters on my right are Dahlmann and Aures with their tanks directly on the bank of the Luga. With them is a group of our pioneer platoon under Mack. They have set up a machine gun there. About 600 to 700 meters further downriver, exactly at the Verse estuary, there is Oswald with 5 Skodas and Wilhelm Lope with 2 Panzer IVs. Since the morning they have been busy taking the opposite bank with their fire. I can't help laughing about it. I suppose that they still have a few crew members among them who are trying to get the tank assault badge by trying to force some kind of engagement in that manner. Maybe I should recommend myself for the infantry assault badge. The amount of time I have spent on reconnaissance patrols on foot recently beggars description. But what choice do I have with my indigent protection platoon than to grab a machine pistol and to head out with another of my men to take a look at the surroundings myself? There is no one else to do the job. My shitty mood is not being improved by the pouring rain. In general, today's situation is as follows. From our bridgehead, the 1st Infantry Division attacks towards the northwest towards Kingisepp Narva. The 6th Panzer Division thrusts towards the northeast to Krasnoye Selo. A battalion of Infantry Regiment 118 advances on the road running parallel to the northern bank on the right of the Luga towards the 36th Infantry Division, which is approaching from the bridgehead at Zapsk. The 1st Panzer Division attacks from the Zapsk bridgehead towards the northwest and then, linking up with us, turns towards Krasnoye Selo on the coast of the Gulf of Finland. The 1st Infantry Division and the 1st Panzer Division advanced towards one another and formed a cauldron in which they encircled the 1st Red Guards Division and other Red Army elements at the Luga. Ourselves, we are only advancing slowly in face of the tough resistance offered by the elite divisions of the Reds at Jyrki. On the first day of the offensive, the 1st Infantry Division managed to capture the positions and anti-tank obstacles at Srednje Selo and immediately positioned their artillery on point 61, where it had already opened fire the same day. How far they have advanced now on the 4th day, I do not know. Our division, however, the battalion of Infantry Regiment 118, is stuck on the forest in front of Krucie Ruci. The enemy is still sitting in the opposing bank of the Luga. That surely includes the observation post which is spotting for the long-range railway guns which the Russians have about 15 kilometers away from here, near Weiman. But the Russian will surely be beaten soon, just a short time, and then the whole drama will be over. August the 13th, 1941. 06:45, on the road in front of the bridgehead. Our defensive task at the river has ended. The Nebelwerferabteilung has been shifted forward into the bridgehead, and my platoon, as well as those of Lope and Oswald, who had been standing further downriver, and that of Wünsche, who had been defending the bridge, have now reunited under Hille. They are waiting along the road in front of the bridge until the division has passed by. We are to attach ourselves to the staff, as we are now directly subordinated to the commander of the division. Only yesterday, Hille remarked that this way not much is going to happen to us anymore. And he's right, as General Landgraf is nothing like the old Kempf, who could always be found in the furthermost line inside his half-track. But never mind that now, I'm sure there'll be enough tasks to fulfill. Today, on the 5th day of the offensive, the Russian force has withdrawn towards the next village behind Jyrki, from where he is now defending himself behind a large anti-tank obstacle with the usual tenacity. Yesterday, my old comrade Edi Brüggermann was killed during the fighting for this obstacle. He had only just arrived here from the Ersatzabteilung in Paderborn. Just like Rudi Daun, Brüggemann was an old boy of the 5th Company and had been with me on Christian Schmidt's training course. He had been in action in Poland and France, and now, after having been promoted to lieutenant, he has been keenly looking forward to his first deployment at the head of the service arm, at whose side he had been raised in Sennelager. Now we are standing here alongside the road, watching the vehicles of the divisions as they drive past us. The armored half-track in which General Kempf used to lead has just driven past. Soon we'll also cross the bridge, on which men of the Organisation Tod are currently repairing the damage caused by Russian long-distance battery fire. Aircraft have tried to hit the bridge as well. There are huge craters which surely have been carved into the ground by Russian 1,000 kilo bombs. I remember that morning when we drove back from the bridgehead, when everything was shrouded in dense fog. The black bridge girders rising wraith-like into the sky, the ground pockmarked with bomb and shell craters, and the road lined with the white birchwood crosses marking the graves of fallen comrades and the mass graves of the Russians. Then the sight of the burned woodland, the scorched heathland and the shot-up houses. Through all that we withdrew and then had to wait until the other army wings here in the northwest had closed in on Leningrad. In those 4 weeks of waiting, the Russians had entrenched themselves so well that each of his excellent positions could only be captured with great casualties. We've now found shelter in a forest near Jyrki. The boss has just been down to see the commander of the division and asked him for new orders. There were none, but he was issued with a fortification map showing all red positions up to the railway line from Kingisepp to Leningrad. What it shows is quite tremendous. A defensive system which will give us a lot to chew on. The only good thing is that we more or less rid ourselves of the red artillery, especially the railway guns which kept pounding our rearward areas with high explosive and flame oil shells. Yesterday in the darkness, our own 15 centimeter long barrels passed by and, damn, they do fire some enormous coffers. And the effect of the Russian fire in our area? Well, these 21 or 28 centimeter shells uproot even the biggest tree. One has grazed the bridge, and even that has caused the whole construct to sag. But this morning already, our 28-ton tanks could cross it again. And still, the Russians construct good bunkers wherever they can, and they are not taking any chances. Right next to the village, there is one of those wooden sand bunkers to which the German artillery inflicted a total of 0 damage. One needs to crack these in close combat and by lobbing hand grenades through the firing slits. And the anti-tank trenches these chaps have shoveled are simply enormous. There is no way one of our Skodas could cross those in a rush. On the far side, the steep wall is about 2 meters high, while from the other side the run-up towards this wall only drops gently. Often these trench obstacles run along rivers and streams, while in front of those there are often additional wire obstacles. They can also be found behind the anti-tank trench. In the forest of Yorki, long before the actual anti-tank obstacle, there were several trench lines and the whole area was littered with foxholes. That the attack is gaining ground at a slower pace than that right after crossing the border, where the troops were inferior in numbers and quality compared to the Red Guard division we are facing here, comes as no surprise. We've taken heavy casualties in front of these cunningly constructed defenses. Even though the campaign has been a great success so far, we are paying a high price for it. Only yesterday, in front of Zapsk, the 1st Panzer Division destroyed 70 tanks. The Wehrmachtsbericht reported this yesterday evening. They face far less resistance than we do here. Many dead lie in our bridgehead. In the cemetery of the main dressing station at Volovo lie over 100 more. The Russians, however, have left thousands dead in front of our lines. August 14th, 1941, Thursday. 1800 hours. It is raining again and thick clouds are hanging low in the sky. Really not looking great. The weather chaps of the division have stated that night frosts aren't rare in this area of Russia from about mid-August onwards. From Schmauch I have received a thick overcoat, and from Unteroffizier Albert I have collected a thin Russian blanket, of which he has several on his vehicle. As far as I am concerned, frost can set in now. From Yorki we have moved to Vypolsova. We are now a few kilometers north of that village in a forest in front of an anti-tank trench. From the road, which can be barred with concrete obstacles, the steep 2-meter deep trench runs 500 meters through the fields where it meets a stretch of high forest. Bongard and his company, together with the Kratschützen, are in the next village, which is closest to the Luga woodlands and thus in a position to bar the withdrawal of Russian troops flooding back from there. It will have to be seen if any of them make an appearance there. Yesterday evening I spent quite some time with Theo Langenbruch, who is now acting divisional orderly of the regiment. We talked about a number of subjects. We both wish that the boss returns soon, very soon in fact, to take over the company again. Surely it won't be long until we are being deployed again. No one in the company enjoys all this loitering around. It feels shit to pass all these bunkers and defensive positions with the knowledge that one has done absolutely nothing to aid the capture of them. We live like battlefield tourists on summer holiday. They should really charge us money for it. The division has just interrogated a few prisoners, and I was able to listen in on some of them. An Oberleutnant of the staff stood behind the prisoners and made notes. The prisoners were interrogated by Sonderführer Stein, who is a German from Ukraine. I had some mints in my pocket and offered some to Stein, to the Oberleutnant and also to the prisoner. Stein laughed and said to the Russian, "Yes, see, these are bullets with which we Germans will shoot you." The Russian had a good laugh. The interrogation had the following result. The Russian was 30 years old and a foundry worker from Leningrad. In 1933 he had served 1 year in the Red Army and he was not a party member. On July the 14th he had suddenly been drafted and was brought to Krasnoye Selo. He had been there up until about 2 days ago. They had nothing to do there, they just shoveled some foxholes. At one time there had been firing practice, where every Red Army soldier had been allowed to fire 3 whole cartridges. 2 days ago they had been quickly formed into a battalion and subordinated to the 1st Red Guards Division, which had had great losses in the previous fighting. He knew that that division was commanded by a general, but he had never seen or met the battalion or regimental commander. They then traveled 30 kilometers by train and 70 kilometers on foot to reach the Luga. Without any rest, they had then been deployed in combat, came under heavy German fire, and had been forced to withdraw. He and 8 other men had decided to go over to the Germans. The fire had been so heavy that they had crawled towards the German lines on their bellies, and once they had been close enough, they had stood up, raised their arms, and had been taken prisoner. The prisoner made a good impression on me. He was also quite clean, so it is clear that the brothers are short of ammunition. He also told us that he had seen lots of tanks, artillery, and flak batteries. All in all, quite interesting. August 15th, 1941, Friday, 10:30. I've just been visited by Feldwebel Ulrich of Neuling's company. His group is deployed not far away from here. We are still waiting to be deployed. The situation is as follows. Koll has taken command of the leading Kampfgruppe, and his unit was the only one in the whole corps to reach its objective of the day. For that, he was mentioned in dispatches. Koll is now furthest in front and well beyond the main railway line. On our left, the 36th Infantry Division is making good progress. On the right, the 1st Panzer Division had encountered heavy resistance, which soon stalled its advance. Kampfgruppe Raus is now tasked to hit the Reds from the flank in an attempt to take pressure off the 1st Panzer Division. We might participate in this flanking thrust together with the recon section and 2 companies of Kratzschützen. Hille has informed us that we might get a deployment order by 1200 hours. I hope it will come through. Yesterday evening I drove to the rear to where Martin Log and his fuel columns are, or rather, should have been. He wasn't there. Seems he is still down at Wolowo. On my way I came past several bunkers and anti-tank trenches. This I found highly interesting. Along a small stream and on quite soggy ground, the Russian had expertly dug an anti-tank ditch which ended once it reached the road. That was covered with a minefield. On the other side of the road, the trench continued. Further behind the trench, behind an area covered with foxholes, they had built several cleverly camouflaged artillery bunkers, which impressed me a lot. Some of them were even made of concrete. To do so, they had used concrete slabs, which they produced somewhere in the hinterland. These slabs only weigh 100 kilos or so each and are then put together with the use of cement. Each slab is about 25 centimeters high, about 1 meter thick, and made in a manner which allows the construction of several different bunker types. The Russians also have several types of wooden bunkers here. They are virtually shell-proof if not hit directly on one of division slits. Just now there has been an exciting interruption. 8 Ratas were chasing one of our Henschel observation aircraft. The Henschel flew a tight turn and then flew across the edge of the forest at an altitude of only about 10 meters, 2 of the Ratas right behind it. I could see how the first Rata fired a burst into the Henschel and how flames erupted from its back when the Russian explosive rounds hit. During the show, I stood behind the tank. One has to be careful as the Ratas very often strafe our columns with their guns and drop small 2-kilo high explosive bombs as well. After the wild chase had raced over our heads, one could hear rapturous cheering from one corner of the woods, from which there was a better view of what happened next. One of the Ratas crashed into the ground right behind the woods, while the other broke off its attack and headed back. A pillar of thick black smoke rose up from where the Red fighter had come down. I started running to the spot to take some photographs when suddenly 4 more Ratas appeared out of nowhere and started raking the ground with machine guns and 2-kilo bombs. I threw myself into a foxhole when one flew directly towards me, its projectiles detonating all around. Damn, I really had a lot of luck there. Our flag could well have fired too, but the crews had all run into cover. Coincidentally, we had some good food today. A few Feldwebel had gone organizing. Opetz is now to take charge of the field kitchen because Enz, the chef, is of the opinion that he is too well decorated and that he doesn't need to put in any work to keep other men fed. There's always just enough for himself though. Swines like that are no rarity. Today we had cabbage and carrot stew with a few bits of potato in it. In addition, a tin of plums, half a bar of chocolate and half a lemon each. Also half a cup of sugar each. To that, we can add the basketful of cucumbers and beetroot which the Feldwebels had supplied. Nothing to complain about. I just heard that the 1st Panzer Division has broken the resistance and is advancing again. We are now part of Kampfgruppe Koll. August 16th, 1941. Saturday, 0900 hours. We are standing at the outskirts of Podobizy village. Departure was supposed to be at 0900, but as usual we have to wait again. At the moment, the motorized infantry of the 1st Panzer Division is moving through, all in armored personnel carriers. This division, with the low house number, has the advantage over us in matters like that. Just now, we were informed that every platoon is to deliver a plucked chicken to the field kitchen, and just for fun, I took the chance and tried to catch a couple myself. My radio operator, Gefreiter Stenger from Paderborn, is far too slow, and the legs of Wittkötter, my loader, are far too short to chase something as agile as a chicken. I too had a lot of trouble, chased one of the beasts through a barn and through the houses and vehicles before it managed to find shelter under a house. Having managed to chase it out by prodding it with a long stick, the chase continued. Only after I was sweating like a pig and completely out of breath was the chicken, which seemed to be in the same exhausted state, finally taken prisoner after having been cornered at a garden fence by me and a cudgel-armed lancer. A second one was caught in a similar manner. Wittkötter seems to know how to prepare the beasts. Right now, while we are rolling along again and I'm writing this, he is busy plucking the chicken on the engine deck. Of course, only one of the chickens will be delivered to the field kitchen. 1100 hours. We are standing among a row of beech trees on a field between a meadow and an oat field. No one has a proper idea about what's going on. The Kampfgruppe has suddenly been renamed. Instead of Major Röhmhild, it is now an Oberleutnant who is in command of what consists of a company of the Panzeraufklärungsabteilung, 2 companies of Kratzschützen, our Panzer Company, a battery of 7 5s, and a bit of flak. All around us there are pillars of smoke rising from a multitude of burning villages. All around us there is fighting. Yesterday, our Kampfgruppe was deployed on the left wing of the 1st Panzer Division and on the right flank of Kampfgruppe Koll. What is happening at the moment while we are advancing on Chimosovo, I don't know. Detonations in front of us and smoke is rising from behind a curtain of pine trees which is blocking our view. One of us has been killed up ahead. The Russians have thrown a Molotov cocktail, a bottle filled with fuel, phosphorus and some other local brew, on one of our armored cars, which immediately started to burn. While I was walking to a nearby crop of trees with a page of the Pravda in my hand, a chap from the anti-tank section called over to warn me that there are still Russians among those trees. Our line ends just behind their position, not the place to conduct that kind of business. At the moment the weather is good. Some clouds in the sky offer good protection for our bombers. There is a light breeze which carries away the dust which is thrown up by our vehicles. There is less dust now that the roads haven't dried up fully after the rainfall in the previous days. Leningrad is not far away now. Last night we could see the many searchlights of that huge city hectically probing the sky like huge white fingers. I guess our bombers were at work again, as at the same time we could see flashes of exploding anti-aircraft shells. 1300 hours. My platoon is still in the same spot, now joined by Wilhelm Schoppe's heavy platoon. The boss, with the platoons of Wünsche and Oswald, has just left when Gassler came up calling for the Sanka and the doctor. 2 of our tanks had been destroyed, Lieutenant Bongard and Feldwebel Zischang. The tanks are burning, 4 men are wounded. An Oberleutnant of the motorized infantry had deployed them to make a flanking attack. I have repeatedly told Hille that he must only deploy the company as a cohesive unit. Now we are waiting to be called away. We, by the way, don't have a Sanka as the Abteilung has turned theirs into a sleep car. I have just been at the front. It is now 16:30 hours and the attack has stalled in front of the forest between Chimosovo and Arogyuli. A Russian battalion has entrenched itself there. At the moment he is getting a proper pounding by our artillery. They have at least 1 tank with a 76mm gun dug in there. I bet it was that which shot up our tank and the armored recon car. It seems to have a good field of fire, as it opened fire on me and a chap of the flak when we walked back from Chimosovo to where our tanks are parked. Impact 200 meters to our left, second one 100 meters to our right, the next one even closer, forcing us to sprint to the edge of the forest where we couldn't be seen anymore. Bongard's and Zischang's tanks had stood on a hill next to the armored car. There they had been well visible from the village of Arogyuli. Initially, Bongard's task had been to pour machine gun fire into a row of hedges, but then the motorized infantry had sent him further forward towards the flank. Shortly after that, both vehicles were hit. I've never said an unkind word to Hauptmann Farrer, but he is slowly and steadily grinding my nerves away. With his tasteless and often lowbrow mannerisms, he has a great talent for annoying people. Now he is serving as a loader in Lopez' platoon with the quest to earn himself some medals. With his opinionated theories about how the tracks influence the transmission, he has made himself really unpopular, especially as the drivers rubbished that theory many times before. Many Ratters out and about here, and I also spotted 2 so far unknown types which dropped 4 torpedo-shaped projectiles or bombs of some kind. In general, the air here is full of lead and projectiles smack into the earth quite regularly. We are now all sitting behind our tanks. About 150 meters away, a crew member of a 2-centimeter quad flak has been shot into the leg. Wonder what else is going to happen today before it gets dark. We haven't really advanced that far. Our Kampfgruppe is not very powerful. Prisoners report that there is a full battalion of Russian infantry ahead. Hell, just now a shell detonated uncomfortably close to where we are. those damned Reds and their long-distance shooting. August the 21st, 1941, Thursday. We are now less than 30 kilometers away from the coast and a maximum of 45 kilometers away from central Leningrad. Another 20 kilometers until we reach Krasnoye Selo. We've taken a defensive position here for a while until the 1st Panzer Division can take the Luga, where the Russians are still offering fierce resistance from the rear. Now, after a week in which we formed the tip of the vanguard of the division, I will try to get all the details of the attack on those days onto paper. No wonder that on quiet days, when one is waiting or resting and isn't fighting, one writes down a lot of unimportant details. After all, these are unimportant days. But on days of heavy fighting, on such days, one often writes only a few sober words. On August the 16th, we were in front of Chimosovo, where our vanguard, which is what we had become by then, was unable to advance any further. When it became dark, our whole company was to attack Arokyuli. Before forming up for the attack on the village, our tanks had to drive a good distance through the forest. On our right was pine forest, from which our riflemen advanced on that dump of a village, some houses of which were burning brightly, which greatly aided visibility in the dark. It was Hille's first attack, and he was clearly very nervous about it. He ran back and forth on foot, and by the time the company had finally deployed, it had become pitch dark. For a moment, everything was quiet, but then a white signal flare rose into the sky, we switched our engines on and rode forward to attack. We advanced without our heavy platoon, which first had to burn out some machine gun nests which were pinning down our riflemen with their fire. I could hear bullets whizzing over our heads and the eerie sound whenever one ricocheted off one of our vehicles. The riflemen were by then all face down in the grass. In general, the panzer crewmen make a lot less fuss about a bit of shooting. With his Panzer IV, Lope engaged a couple of machine gun nests, in front of which several wounded Kratzschützen were writhing on the ground. There was no way to recover them, so he returned to us just after we had lined up in front of the village, where we all opened fire on the houses. The best option in the darkness was to set fire to all the houses and to seek out further targets in the light of the flames. Yet, during our approach, most of the Russians had already fallen back into a forest behind the village. I was on the right wing and literally crawled forward at first, matching Hille's speed. However, this quickly became boring, so my platoon advanced in bounds until it had reached a place about 500 meters away from the village, from where we plastered the village with everything we had. The mostly straw-covered shacks caught fire quickly and made for good illumination. There was a big silo in the village too, and a windmill which didn't start to burn, but received several direct hits as everyone expected it to be the hideout for the Red artillery observer who, all through the evening, had expertly guided the fire of the Russian artillery. After we had set fire to the village, we, together with the infantry, set out to establish a defensive position in it. I was deployed at the exit of the village near the road. A platoon of Kratzschützen was there, Feldwebel Westhoff among them. We had 4 of our tanks there as well. Next to me there was Matusek, Gosler and Aures, all old experienced Feldwebel. After I had distributed our tanks as well as possible in the darkness, I took the first watch up until midnight, when Wittkörner, my little gunner, was to take over. After him, Wrenger and Pusch the driver. We had piled up some hay behind the tanks, which made a more comfortable place to rest than the bare ground. Wrenger was sleeping in the tank as usual. He claims it is the safest place to be, and as it is also a lot better for his nerves, I am not going to disagree. Towards the end of my watch, the moon was rising, a huge glowing red crescent. Then there was the blood-red glow of all the burning villages in the area, quite a sight to behold. When I saw the moon, I had to think of Hamburg, all the good days I spent there when on leave from the army, and the nightly trips back from the bar. Yes, all that is gone, it is all over. And should I one day be back in Hamburg and walk back home, I will have to think about these hours here in Russia. When my watch was over, I went to take some photographs of the fires. I am looking forward to seeing if the photos will be usable. I then took Wittkörner's place and went to sleep. Before that, I had shown Oberleutnant Jonas the location of the hay bales. In this regard, the riflemen are far less fortunate than we are. They are in their foxholes on the naked ground without coats, blankets or tent squares. No chance to even think of catching some sleep in that manner. At 4 a.m. the Russian artillery began to harass us. At 04:30 I took over the watch from Pusch and climbed into the turret. Cannon and machine guns ready, loaded pistol in my pocket. Time and experience have taught me to be careful. We were now all inside the tank, and the driver and the radio operator both began to snore loudly. But one gets used to that kind of experience in the army, and it didn't really bother me. Then, suddenly, in the distance, I could hear the sound of motorbike engines and the clatter of hooves. Russians. And only a minute later, a machine gun starts barking and an anti-tank gun starts firing. One shot, another shot, and another. "Ceasefire," someone shouts, and I hear the words, "Rucki weg." I climb out of the tank to see what's going on the right in the field of fire of Matusek's tank. 3 Red Army soldiers had walked up, all pretty ancient fellows, with a horse pulling a 2-wheeled cart. Our Lancers welcomed them. On the road there was another similar cart which had tried to turn around when the first shots were fired and was then shot up by the anti-tank gun. I send one of the Russians and a couple of our men back to collect the Russian rifles. The 3 old fellows tell us that there is a 4th wounded man still on the cart. Our Lancers shot the wounded horse and left the Russian, who pretended to be dead, where he was. They had just returned when the dead Russian suddenly stood up and made a sprint towards some nearby bushes. Our machine gun started firing, but didn't manage to hit him. That's what dead Russians do, at least those who are not stiff and cold. Welcome to the After Action Report. A few things to talk about here, but before we'll talk about the video, in the last episode, the channel regular KP from Denmark requested some German dialects in the comments, so why not? To start, here is some of the equivalent to the King's English, which most people call Hochdeutsch, meaning High German, but the correct terminology of this dialect-free version is actually Standard German. Subtitles will be on screen. So, Standard German sounds something like this. Willkommen auf meinem Kanal, willkommen zu einem neuen Video. Ich hoffe, ihr habt viel Spaß beim Zuhören und lernt vielleicht etwas. Well, this one should have been pretty easy for you to understand, right? Here come the dialects. First of all, the Colonian dialect, which, as I said, is the area where I currently live. It goes something like this.
So, das Video ist jetzt fertig, ne? Ich habe das fertig produziert und jetzt mache ich erstmal ein Päuschen und dann produziere ich vielleicht the next video, nicht?
The next one is the Berlin dialect. It's a bit tricky, but I'll give it a go. So, das ist hier der After-Action-Report, war. Ich hab das schon immer so gemacht und deswegen mache ich das doch weiter so. And finally, a bit of Bavarian. Ich kann auch ein wenig Bayerisch, aber ich war da lang nicht und man versteht's auch kaum. So Akkorden. Well, I hope those weren't too bad. There are literally dozens of dialects and you can't know them all. Speaking of dialects, also most of you have probably seen the movie Inglourious Basterds. There is that one famous scene in the underground bar where the group of conspirators get approached and discovered by SS-Sturmbannführer Hellstrom, who can pinpoint the birth cities of most of the characters but is puzzled by the accent of Michael Fassbender. You see, while Fassbender actually lived in Germany for a couple of years as a child, his German is good, but it's far from perfect, especially in this case where he is supposed to be playing an army captain. It is almost immediately obvious that this man isn't native, and listening to them talk as a native German, it is downright absurd to think that this ruse got as far as it did, considering Till Schweiger and August Diehl in this scene are so very obviously native. Most of the other Germans are as well. So it's most definitely not the three-finger gesture that blows their cover, it's just the final nail in the coffin. Now, regarding the video, what I found most peculiar is the thirst for medals. The story of a captain acting as a loader inside a tank just so he can get some assault badges is most puzzling. I've never heard of something like that before, but it makes sense actually. Especially if the captain is somewhat disliked, so he can get out of the way and not break anything. And finally, he talks about getting used to snoring. I can tell you that much, being birthed in an underground bunker with 25 other dudes, you have to get used to it at some point, even though it sounds like some of the men are roaring like lions instead of breathing. Funnily enough, out in the woods at night, where snoring can give you away, almost nobody did. I guess the body knows instinctively to keep quiet or something. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Cheers.